I think we will kick it off. So the question is, why are we talking about this issue now? We found out that capacity charges are an important part of a lot of municipal buildings' electricity bills, particularly the largest buildings, and that we know that starting next summer, the price of capacity that we're going to talk about today is going to be doubling for most of us in the MAPC region. What we don't know is how much quantity of capacity you're going to be charged for, and that's something that thankfully you have a large degree of control over. But the key is that you need to determine that quantity by actions you take this summer. So we wanted to try to get some information out here quickly to help you take action this summer if you can, to avoid or minimize sort of the price impacts coming next year. So the agenda for today is that we're first going to be joined by Pat Ryan from EnerNOC. He's going to talk to us about capacity charges and the management solutions. Then Susan McPhee, the energy manager for Winchester and Woburn, is going to talk to us about how do you anticipate the peak load, which is the key time that you want to reduce your load, is when the rest of the system is peaking. And then Ruthy Bennett, the energy manager for Arlington and Bedford, is going to talk to us about, okay, how do you plan to reduce the load, called a load shed? How do you implement a plan like that? And then both Ruthy and Susan are going to talk about their experiences implementing these plans. So we're really excited, and with that, we'll dive into it. So for those of you who may not know, MAPC is the regional planning agency serving the 101 cities and towns in the greater Boston region. And that's all I'll say about us right now. So just to put it in perspective, the capacity charge issue. If we look at Arlington and Winchester, where Ruthy and Susan are from, the increases on the capacity charge by 2018 in Winchester could amount to what is now 10% of their total energy budget. So that's electricity, heating oil, and gas. And in Arlington, it's almost a 20% increase in just the electricity budget. So unmanaged, these can really constitute a large cost. One of the biggest takeaways I want to provide for everyone today is that this is an approachable issue, and that we really want to empower you to take some level of action, even if it's just within one building this summer. And the biggest way that you want to start off, the most important step, is to understand your risk. And so the first thing you need to do is contact your electricity supply broker. They're going to help you understand the risk. The first thing they're going to help you understand is, how does your current contract deal with the capacity costs? In some cases, it's a pass-through cost to you, in which case you get all the risk and all the reward if you can reduce your peak load. But in some cases, you're on a fixed rate, in which case there might not be any actual risk for you immediately. You might actually be entitled to bill credits if you are able to reduce your peak load. So there might be an upside. But it certainly will also help you when you're negotiating your next contract, because if you're not taking the risk, the supplier is. So that can help you in the future. And the brokers may be able to help you amend your current contract to minimize your risks. So definitely reach out to them and see what your options are. And they can help you compile a list of all the buildings and the accounts that could be impacted. We'll help you figure out which ones those are too. And I think the biggest thing is, come out with a plan for what you want to do this summer. As I said, even if it's just one building, try it out, because then next summer you can maybe expand upon that and what you learned. So we really hope this is a informational and useful webinar for everyone. And with that, I want to take a couple quick polls to find out sort of who's in the audience here. So first is we're going to find out how your contract deals with capacity costs. So with that, we'll open up the poll. So you should see this either as a pop-up or on the right side of your screen. And toss in some answers here. Okay, great. I'm going to close the poll here. So we had about half of the folks here don't know, so great. Contact your broker. For maybe a third of the folks, there is a pass-through cost. So again, this is going to be great for you to help manage those costs. Another third are in the no pass-through, which is great. So no immediate risk, but hopefully we can help you too. And a few don't know. I'm glad that's in the minority. Excellent. So then the next poll we'll just do is just to find out, hey, who's on the call? Because I think this is a interesting topic for folks in energy, in finance, in facilities, and when you implement your plan, you're probably going to want to talk to people in all of these departments. So it's good just to see who's on the phone here. All right. So we've got vast majority, I'd say, are energy managers. We've got a third of folks in facilities as well, and then we've got a bunch in the other category. So nice diverse group here. So excellent. So with that, we are going to jump over to Pat Ryan. So Pat, I'll pass it off.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Pat.
Great, excellent. I am just sharing the screen over here. Is my screen coming okay there, Patrick? Coming through okay?
It is.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for having me on the call and for joining us today. My name is Pat Ryan, and Patrick reached out to me to discuss the capacity situation in New England because I work for a company called EnerNOC. It's actually based right here in Boston, and dealing with system capacity charges both at a system level and an end user level is something that we are very adept at helping people with through a very software and technology driven standpoint. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what capacity is, why it's changing, how it's changing, and what you can do to manage the increase for your town. Once I conclude, you'll understand why it's changing, but your ability to reduce these increases will depend on having the ability to communicate this change to your town stakeholders. And I know that Ruthy and Susan are actually going to talk about that from personal experience. I'll make myself available one-on-one to speak with anybody that's interested after the call, and we'll be sending my contact information out as well, and it's actually showing up right here on the screen. So what are we talking about today? Today we're talking about capacity charges, which for some of you are actually going to show up as a line item on your electric bill. Those are the folks who during that survey indicated that they have some sort of pass-through arrangement. And there's other folks who it's not going to show up as a line item on your bill, but it's something to be very aware of anyway. And those are likely the folks on the line that had the fixed contracts. So what is capacity charge? A capacity charge is simply the money that you pay as part of your bill that ISO New England uses to ensure that there will be grid stability, or in other words, that there will always be electricity when you need it. The reason your capacity charge is going up is tied to the nationwide energy situation, which is actually quite interesting. Increased domestic natural gas supplies have become available due to large-scale fracking throughout the country. The availability of natural gas is important because electricity costs are closely tied to natural gas costs. So one would think that more natural gas throughout the U.S. would drive electricity costs down. The problem for New England, though, is that we don't have the infrastructure in place to receive all of the gas that we need. As you know, pipelines in New England are insufficient to bring enough gas in to meet demand. As a result, until we have more pipelines, the market is pricing the constraints into your electric rates. So essentially, there's a lot of good gas out there. We just can't get it. Now, there's a degree of fairness here, and these are not randomly assigned costs. The amount of stress each building puts on the power grid determines how much that building will need to pay to leave the grid balanced. Here's how it works in 3 steps, starting with the entire New England power grid over a three-month period, just as an example. Then we're going to dial it in to a look at a specific day on the grid, and finally, we'll dial into the specific hour when capacity charges are established. Now, note, I'm going to show you some graphs and numbers here, and this is primarily conceptual. These numbers are directionally very close to what they are, but taking a very conceptual look at this with you guys. So let's look at a 3-month period for a power grid. Let's assume this is New England, and let's start by looking what the power grid might look like hour by hour over a 3-month period. Just taking a walk through this graph, you can see that lots of energy is used throughout the region on weekdays, with much less being used during the nights and weekends. And these are the peaks, the weekdays here on this chart, and the nights and weekends are the valleys that you see. Since we always need electricity to be available to us, the ISO needs to look at the high watermark of demand for the region and ensure that our infrastructure is in place to meet it. This high watermark for 2014 actually happened to occur on July 2nd last year at a level of somewhere around 27 gigawatts or 27 million kilowatts. So that's the system peak. And what's important to note is that this is a really, really easy point to find on this graph in hindsight. The problem is, hindsight is 2020. In order to effectively manage this, you need to be able to anticipate it and predict it and plan for it in advance, and then actually be able to execute on a plan in real time to manage your costs down. I'm going to get into a little bit more how you can do that. Let's take a look at July 2nd specifically. So now we're dialing it in. We're putting a magnifying glass on that one day. And this is a load profile. On the x-axis going out, this shows you the time of day. So it starts at midnight, and then it goes to noontime at 12 p.m., and then so on across to the right. I've highlighted 4 p.m. because that's when the region hit its peak. On the y-axis, we have the kilowatt demand for the entire New England region. So that's 27 million kilowatts, or 27 gigawatts. Now, if we dial in a little closer, let's take a look at this specific hour at 4 o'clock. What was going on at that hour? So basically what this is telling you, this is the sum. This 27 million kilowatts is the sum of the load of every single building at that time. So the ISO goes back, they find the high water mark of the system, and then they take a snapshot of what every single building was doing at that time. Now, for conceptual purposes, let's look at a large high school. A large high school might be around 1,000 kilowatts in demand or a megawatt. And the way that your capacity cost is determined is you take your kW demand level, so this 1,000 kW at the time of the New England peak, and you multiply that times the capacity price. And I actually have a 12 on the end of this equation here. I'm multiplying it by 12 months because capacity is typically talked about on a monthly price. And for the 2015 year, at a rate of $3.43 per month times 12 months, you can see that the capacity cost for this building is about $41,000. So I'm going to move on to just take a look at the trend of these prices. So as what we're talking about today is you can't actually control these prices, this 343. These are set. What you can actually control, though, is this 1,000. So we're looking out over the next several years. There's 2 different load zones that most of the folks on this call are going to be in. There's NEMA, which is the area immediately around Boston that most of you are probably going to be in. And when you look at the next few years here, these costs are actually quintupling over the next 24 months. The areas surrounding that aren't quite in NEMA, It's not quite quintupling, but they're more than doubling. They're actually almost tripling. So you guys also need to pay attention to your capacity costs. Here's a little bit of a closer view, and I know Patrick's going to send this out after the call, but basically all of these orange towns in here are the ones in the NEMA zone where costs are quintupling. So what does this mean to you? So let's look at a typical 1 megawatt load in New England, in NEMA, and what's happening over the next several years. Where in 2015, on an average basis, that load would cost you $136 per day. Next year is going to cost you $258 a day, and the following year is going to cost you $490 per day. If you look across the budgets of your municipality and of your town, you probably don't have too many other line items that are going to be taking such a drastic increase over the next few years. And I have the monthly breakdowns and also the annual breakdowns on top here.
And Pat, this is Patrick. Can I ask, would a typical, maybe a typical town be looking at maybe 1 megawatt total of size? Is that representative maybe across the big accounts like high schools and maybe senior centers, town halls?
That's actually probably a good way to put it. For an average size town, that might be a good way to look at it, as the sum across your larger accounts. We do work with plenty of school districts, though, where they'll have a high school, which on its own is, a megawatt in size. You can tell exactly what size or roughly what size load your buildings have just by looking at an electric bill and looking at the demand levels, the demand KW levels, and that'll give you an idea. So that's a rough idea there. So the challenge that, let's go to the next slide here. The challenge that we face is the fact that these prices are increasing so dramatically. And the same exact building, if you change nothing in your operations between this year and next year and the following year, that if that building costs you $34,000 or $40,000 in capacity this year, 2 years from now, that exact same building is going to cost you $180,000 in capacity. So something you're going to likely want to plan for. The good news is that you can mitigate the impact that this increase has on your budgets in two ways. First, through financial risk management arrangements with your suppliers. Second, through physical energy management of your buildings. I'll start with the first one. With financial risk management, many of you are likely already or should be speaking with your suppliers about who is going to bear the risk of capacity costs, you or them. There are pros and cons to either arrangement. You can shift the risk onto a supplier by entering into what is commonly known as a fixed all-in contract in exchange for contracting at a slightly higher dollar per kW rate, or sometimes that rate can actually be a pretty material increase in your kWh rate. On the flip side, if you can bear the risk yourself, you can have the capacity costs passed through to you, thus eliminating any risk premiums that the supplier needs to add on for the built-in capacity, and giving you the opportunity to actually be proactive about your energy management and save and enjoy the savings associated with that from a capacity standpoint. So that was the financial side. On the physical energy management side, reductions in your capacity levels can equate to significant cost avoidance in the very near term if you're shouldering the financial risk through a pass-through contract, or in the medium term at your next contract renewal if your supplier is currently shouldering the risk. Here's a look at the same high school example in which you can clearly see that the value in reducing your contribution to the region's peak load. And just as an example, what I'm showing is the effect of minimizing your actual capacity tag, so the amount of power that you're using at the time when New England hits its peak load. So if you're taking this building that's normally running at 1,000 kilowatts and you're somehow able to bring that down to 500 kilowatts at that time, on July 2nd at 4 o'clock when the grid hits its peak, then you have $90,000 of potential value on the table there for you. So it's good to set up that range to know what the realm of possibilities are, and then see how close you can get to actually hitting that. So you can accomplish these load reductions by planning for the days when the region's capacity charges are likely to be set. And then on these days, making the extra effort across town to conserve energy where possible. To be clear, energy reduction can be challenging across any organization. It requires a temporary departure from business as usual when lighting, air conditioning, and other building systems are adjusted downward, and pushback can be expected. There are two important things to note, however. First, everyone needs to understand the amount of money that is actually at stake. Second, everyone needs to recognize that even these temporary and small changes to electric usage for a few times during the summer will result in meaningful changes to your capacity charges going forward. Real-time energy and cost data can help you make the business case clear for your teams from a planning, communication, and reporting perspective. I'll give you an example here, and then I know Ruthy and Susan are going to talk deeper into how they actually can do this within their towns. But first, work with your building managers and occupants in advance to develop thresholds for your capacity levels so that the risk is clearly defined and understood from a financial and operational perspective. As a high-risk day approaches, communicate with your building owners or building managers beginning days in advance to ensure that everyone is on board with what they need to do for game time to hit the desired levels of capacity. During the risky day, monitor your progress in real time and keep occupants up to date with progress. Immediately afterward, while it's still fresh in everyone's mind, so the day of, that night, or right afterward, provide a debrief on your results with an aim toward even stronger performance next time. So if you had a few different scenarios where you know that if you lock in your capacity for next year at 1,000 kilowatts, that's going to cost you $180, and that's or $180,000 for the year, and you know that's a tough thing for your budgets, but then you have this really good scenario where if you can lock it in at 500 and that's only going to cost you $90,000, you have your range of where you guys want to hit. And then immediately after that day passes, you can actually see your data and say, we actually came in at 683 kilowatts. That's going to cost us $122,000. So we ended up, from worst case scenario, from $180,000. Well, hey, look, you guys, by doing what you did, by foregoing and conserving some energy yesterday, we saved potentially almost $60,000 off of what we could have potentially locked in. So nice work. And now now that we understand and have these tangible results, let's figure out for next time, if we can actually do even better. So I'm going to stay on the line to answer your questions at the end of this call, so we'll be able to have a good discussion. Right now, I'd like to summarize a couple of the key points that I made here before handing it over to Susan, who's going to be talking about her work in Woburn, Winchester. In a nutshell, capacity charges are going up in New England. This is a macro-level situation and is not going to change over the next several years. You can lower your capacity charges if you have a plan and the tools. What happens this summer is going to determine your costs for next summer. I can help you execute on your plan by giving you the tools to communicate and mitigate these costs across the organization. And now I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Thanks.
Excellent. And actually, Susan, just while you're getting ready there, this is Patrick again. Just wanted to say that it's great, some of the tools that EnerNOC has to be able to measure your data and get great visibility into that data. And for a lot of you this summer's peak, you're not going to have their tools at your disposal yet. So what Susan and Ruthy are going to talk about are definitely still ways that we can make an impact and that we can get some visibility into our collective or your collective impact. So I think we're super excited that EnerNOC solutions can be probably more of a long-term solution, and hopefully this summer you'll still be able to track and be able to assess your impact.
Great. Thank you, Pat and Patrick. I'm trying to get my desktop. Patrick, have you shared that across? Okay. So I'm Susan McPhee, and I've been working on this in Winchester for several years now. So the big question now, if you're going to do this yourself without the help of EnerNOC, how can you find the peak for the year? And the answer is not that difficult, actually. Let's see, next slide here. So the peak correlates a lot with temperature and weather. So when it's hot and muggy, then the hotter it is, the higher the peak. So last year, as Pat pointed out, it was on July 2nd. Unfortunately, we can't count on that to be every year on July 2nd. You can see at the bottom of this slide the dates for the last few years. So we've been in mid-July for a while now. It's usually always in the summer. It has in the past been in August a couple of times and once in June. And the way that we can identify this is to take a look. Here's a slide showing last summer. So this is the same summer that Pat showed you. This is from June through to August. And as you can see, there's the peak on July 2nd. And note over here, here's the 24 gigawatts, or the way it's expressed on the ISO website, 24,000 megawatts. So it's just over 24,000, and that kind of becomes a rule of thumb for how to predict this. So if we're in the business of predicting and we want to do it ourselves, and the yellow line is showing over 23,500. So those are kind of our danger zones. When you see it creeping up in this area, those are days when you're going to think about if you should do a load shed event in your school, in your high school, or in other facilities around town. Here's another slide showing that same 24,000 mark, and these are all the peaks starting in 2003 along the x-axis here all the way through to last year. So every peak except back in 2004 has been over 24,000 megawatts, sometimes by a lot, sometimes by a little, but that has become my rule of thumb. If it's over 24,000, then that's likely to be a good day to do a load shed, unless you've already had a really high peak day, in which case 24,000 wouldn't really cut it. So that's become a rule of thumb that I use, and we could start using for this year. And then if we see peaks looking lower, we could always vary it down. But for now, I think 24,000 is a reasonable place to start. So where does this data come from? Our grid is ISO New England, and the web address is there. Now, I've been using the web, but MAPC, Patrick's going to kindly put this data together for us and share it. So I'll show you how I've been looking at it over time, and you can do that too. You can do a do-it-yourself, or you can take the data from Patrick. The morning report is the first crucial screen, and then the second screen is the 7-day forecast. So let's take a look at what's on those screens that drives this decision-making process in identifying the peak. First, the morning report gives you peak load data, it gives you timing, and it gives you the weather forecast. So when you go into ISO New England, this is the home screen that you're going to find, and it's worth noting down here is the real-time data that shows you where the system is on the forecast, which is the blue, and then the orange is what's actually happening. And up here on the right-hand corner where the red arrow is pointing is how you get to the morning report. And the morning report looks like this. It's a long screen. So it's giving you the date for today. It's giving you a little further down is the peak for yesterday. Yesterday's peak in megawatts is over here, and it tells you yesterday's peak, Sunday, June 14th, hour ending 18. So it's on a 24-hour time clock, so the hour ending 6 o'clock. So between 5 and 6 was the peak yesterday. And then scrolling down, further down, it tells you the peak for today, the predicted peak. So today's peak is predicted at 15,740 megawatts, so we're not even close to that 24,000 rule of thumb. So we don't have to worry about it for today. Then the next screen that I like to use is the 7-day capacity forecast, where the red arrow is pointing. So when you click on that, the 7-day forecast, there's showing today's, the information from yesterday, and here's the forecast for today, and then this is the 7-day forecast. The 7-day forecast shows you two crucial pieces of information. It's showing you going out for the next 6 days. Here's the forecasted high temperature for the Boston area and for the whole region. So the higher the temperature and also the dew point and the humidity, the greater the likelihood that you're going to have a high usage, all those air conditioners being turned on. So you take a look at your temperatures going out, and that'll give you an idea of if it's looking like a high-risk peak load time. And then the second information is down at the bottom of your screen, the projected peak load over the next 6 days. So it's nice to get there it is at the bottom. It's nice to get a snapshot of what's happening going forward. So if you see that 23,000, 24,000 creeping up, keep an eye on that. Then you can let people know in advance, this is what I think might be coming up. Get ready. We could have a peak load coming, and share that with your leadership in your town. So with that, that's the data that we pull from, and the next slide is how Patrick at MAPC will help you identify this information, and he will share it with you on a regular basis.
Thank you, Susan. So what we wanted to do is, as Susan showed you, is show you where to get the data so you can really dig into it if you need to, but recognizing that many of you may not want to take on that burden, what we're going to do is synthesize that information each day and send out an email. And I'll send out a sign-up after this, so folks can sign up for that. But the idea is that we're going to be using our rule of thumb to start out, and we're going to be using these emails really as sort of a guide for you. I mean, we do want you to definitely assess your own capabilities in town and take a look at the data yourself before you call a load shed event, but we want this to be a helpful tool in that process. So the morning report is updated at 4 a.m. and then between 8:30 and 9 each day. So I will be sending out the email between 8:30 and 9 when we have the most updated data. And the first line in it is going to give you a sort of like risk rating, whether it's unlikely, likely, or highly likely. That it's we're using the term cap tag day, but basically whether this could be the peak for the system for the year. And we are basically saying that anything over 24,000 megawatts is into that highly likely category. If it's between 23,500 and 24, then we'll say it's likely, because ISO's predictions can be a couple percentage points off. And if it's below 23,000, we'll say it's unlikely. So this email is intended to give you a snapshot of today, the temperature, the time, so the peak hour. We'll give you the start and the end date. So in this case, this was all fictitious data in here, but it was 4 to 5 p.m. And so you get a quick snapshot of, is today the day? Do I need to start contacting people? And then you get that lookout to the next week to see if there are any of those dangerous days. And again, in this fictitious data I put together, looks like the second day has high temp of 96, peak load so 25,000. So we say highly likely. I'm going to be attaching a spreadsheet to this email, which will have each day's data tracked in it in a log so that you can use that spreadsheet as a place to look back at what's happened. You could even track your own actions. And I'll also have some graphs and things in there for people who want to really dig into it. But this daily email will be the main idea. And I will also say, when you do talk to your brokers, some of them are offering services to alert you as well. So definitely ask them about that when you talk to them. And with that, I will now pass it over to Ruthy.
So thank you, Patrick, also for putting this together. I think it's really valuable. And I just wanted everyone to know that this sort of webinar came about through conversations. So I talked to a couple of other energy managers. I talked to Patrick and Pat and thought we can try to give everyone else the knowledge that we have, but also we can all try to share the knowledge together. So I'll be brief because I know we're kind of close to the end and want to have time for Q&A, but my biggest point overall is that there's a lot of things you can do now to get ready for when that peak day happens, a lot of conversations you can have now that will help you when the real tough decisions have to be made. So we're going to talk about research, so finding out which of your buildings and accounts are involved in the capacity charge and how much electricity they consume. Make a plan. What can you do at each building? Who has to make those changes? Who has to make the decision about what you can do in each building? Engage your stakeholders. This is not just the building managers, the town manager, the superintendent. These are also the users of the building, the patrons who come to the library, the kids who have summer school, the kids who come to summer camp, the teachers who are in the high school in the summer working on their school plans. And stay connected to the information. So Patrick is going to send us a spreadsheet each morning, which will, again, help us understand what's happening on that day, but also for the next few days, because it could be that it's 96 degrees today, but tomorrow it's going to be 100 degrees. And so even though it might be very hot today, tomorrow might be worse, and that's part of knowing what's coming. So in terms of research, the only accounts that are getting this capacity charge are accounts that have an interval meter. So you could have a building that has a huge demand, but for some reason it doesn't have an interval meter, and then it's not subject to this charge. So it isn't just the size of your account, it's the account type. If you're an Eversource customer, it'll be called a B7 account, and if you're an N-Grid, it'll be called a G3. And you can easily see that on your bills, and you should talk to your consultant and supplier because they can give you a list of which of your accounts are subject to this charge. You also want to really research the building usage and the client needs. If you have a preschool, they probably have less ability to not have air conditioning. If you have perhaps summer camp for kids who are a little bit older, they might be able to use the sprinkler instead of using air conditioning. If, as in Arlington, your library is the place to go if you need to be cool, particularly if you're a senior, then those are different needs than if we had a library that closed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and if it's too hot, we can't help you. In terms of what you have at your buildings, if you have an energy management system, those have potential options to be programmed. Some HVAC equipment can be manually programmed to perhaps get a higher air conditioning setting. So you're going to go, instead of 70 or 72, you might be able to go to 74. If you went up to 74, then you'd be using less air conditioning. So try to research what your options are at each building, and also your communication partners. Is there going to be one person who makes the decision for every building? Is there one person who communicates that decision to all the building operators? Are there parents or library patrons who will also be involved in making the decision or disseminating the information about the decision that was made? So in terms of a communication plan, all of this you can do ahead of time. So who decides peak day? ISO New England won't tell you definitively it's that day, but from all the information they give us and from the spreadsheet that Patrick's going to give us, we're going to make assumptions about which day is the peak day. And Susan has known from her experience that there could be 5 or 6 potential peak days where you shed load, because we really won't know until the end of the year, mostly the end of the summer, which day used the most. Right? It could be that on July 2nd we used the grid used 24,000, and then on August 1st it used 27,000. So you might want to load shed on July 2nd and on August 1st because we don't know which day is the ultimate peak day. Once you get Patrick's spreadsheet and you decide this could be a peak day and you want to shed load, who's going to receive that first alert? Who are you going to send it out to? And who decides what actions? Is it the town manager, the superintendent, the library director? Who are the people who are empowered to make the decisions? And you need to have given them their list of options. This is the first 3 you have to do. These are the next 3 you could do. These are the last 3 that would be really great if you did. But, of course, that's probably more uncomfortable in the building the further you get down the list. And who will process the actions? Do you have a third-party contractor who manages your HVAC? Do you have in-house maintenance people? who's going to do the work, and do they know what to do when you tell them on that day? You want to make sure you don't introduce this concept the morning of a day that you want to shed the load. Then you need an action plan, right? Each building has a list of a number of things they can do. You can close the blinds. You can have people perhaps sit in a different part of the building that has less sun coming in. So if the AC is on to 74 degrees, they might not feel it as much. Each building will have that priority list. The critical action list, meaning we're going to do these three things. Those three things we're definitely going to do. And communicating with your building operators and your users. You want to let the people know who are in the building, using the building, or perhaps the parents of the kids in a summer camp, what's going on, either ahead of time and particularly during that day. Tell the kids to bring extra water bottles or extra water bottles with ice because of the town's decision to try to shed load. And engage your stakeholders. Like I was saying, you have your internal communication, which is your department heads and your program managers, but also your external communication. You don't want people to be surprised when they come to the library thinking that's the cool place to come in the summer, and you've made a decision to, let the AC go up to 76 degrees. You want to have that known ahead of time, or send that communication, or be ready to handle that, perhaps unhappy response. And again, that peak day, you want to be ready before that day of what has to happen, who can make the decision, so you're not as surprised the morning. Let's say it's July 2nd, which is 3 weeks from now. Try to do as much as you can ahead of time so that it isn't a crisis on that day. And then stay connected to the information. That peak day, you'll get an email from Patrick about what's happening. You can also follow the weather apps, right? Basically temps above 90 degrees at Logan, those are days when the grid will really be stretched. So it's not super science in terms of figuring out what the peak day is, also knowing that there's no definitive number. It isn't 24,000 and that's it. It could be 24,000, could be 25,000, depends on how hot a summer we have. And communicate. Like I said, this webinar came about because a few of us started talking and saying, wow, have you heard about this? This is really challenging and, very unnerving for our budgets because we're really not ready for these big budget hits. So definitely communicate, and luckily through Patrick, we'll have an ability to communicate with each other. And talk to your consultants and your suppliers because they know about this, and they can give you tips or tools or tell you what other of their clients are doing. So again, just a quick summary of your checklist that you can do without even making any changes, but you can get ready for the change. And there might be some buildings where you say, we're not ready to make that decision this year. The high school is too critical, the library is too critical. That's okay because this year it doubles, next year it doubles again. So you might have a whole year where you can discuss internally what can you do to avoid that fee next year. You might not be able to make it happen this year. So this is a checklist of figuring out what accounts are affected, communicating with the people who make the decisions and also have to respond to the public, figure out what the actions are for each building and decide who will make those decisions. It might be that on that day there's a program going on at the high school and the principal will say, you know what, I can't do that today because we've got 100 people coming in for a conference. If it were yesterday, I could have done it. Each day will be different. One person is going to receive notification. So if it's you, the energy manager, then you distribute that. And you communicate on the peak day to everyone who needs to know that this is a potential load-shedding day. You talk to the users, the stakeholders, and it would be great if you recorded actions. So, this was a peak day, we shed the load, and you do that 3 or 4 or 5 times in the summer, and then you could look back once we know what the peak day ended up being and see if you hit it, and how well did you do on things that you turned off that day or increased the air conditioning temperature when you hit higher. So a lot of this is research and legwork ahead of time, and then it's that day decision-making depending on what's going on that day in your town and in those specific buildings. One thing you can do is ask your consultant to help figure out what those actual dollar numbers might be for each of your buildings. Because if you bring those dollar numbers, you say this year it's $10,000, next year it's $20,000, in the third year it's $40,000, right? Then people will start taking notice and saying, either we're going to find the money because we can't do this at the library, this is our place where people can come to be cool, or we're going to work over the next year to make it so that we don't have a $20,000 and a $40,000 hit, but we have time to get to that place. So, don't give up because you don't know what to do. There's always some value, and this is the first year that it'll hit us, but the next year and the year after will be larger financial hits. And so you do have time to get more deeply involved in trying to figure out how to shed the load. So now, Susan, do you want to hop back on and talk about how you call load shed?
Sure, I'll try to be quick. As Ruthy mentioned, anticipating it's really important. On Monday morning, I look at that 7-day forecast and try and say it looks like Wednesday or Thursday could be big, so everybody can be starting to get ready. And then on the day of, obviously getting out to people as soon as possible in the morning, so you might want to use the website and take a look yourself if you think it's going to be a load shed day. And then, Patrick will be confirming that with what he sends you. And again, if you know what programs are happening in which building, if you know there's a summer camp in a building, then you might want to, call that principal of that building yourself. Same thing with the library. Our town, definitely the library is perceived as a safe place to go, so they are very reluctant to turn the AC down, but you can make other suggestions like having, moving people down within the building. The top floor is going to be the hottest, so forth and so on. Next slide, Ruthy. And so the morning of the peak, you just want to make sure you're communicating with everybody. You want to give them a specific time that they need to turn the AC down or off by. You want to make sure if there's certain programs that you're aware of, follow up with those people. And then next slide, Ruthy. The web, you can take a look at what is going on. You can see it happening real time on the ISO website, the GRID's website, on the homepage. So that's about it. And I think Patrick has a couple of closing remarks.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, I think we've really drilled this into everyone, but talk to your broker and form a plan, stay informed both through hopefully what we're sending you, what your broker might be able to send you, checking out ISO New England on its own. I really want to encourage people to try this out. Ruthy really nailed it that starting this year, even thinking ahead to next year can help get you ready. Maybe it's just one building you tried in this summer, but why not give it a shot? At least start putting a plan together. And then finally, track your impact and get credit. EnerNOC can really help you with tracking that impact, but you can also talk to your broker and they can tell you what your peak amount was for this year, and next year they can also tell you what that peak amount that you're getting charged for is, so you can see if you had an impact. So definitely, track it so that you can see if you had an impact and you can quantify that. I want to just remind everyone we're going to move into questions here, so please feel free to use the Q&A box to type in some questions. We've got a few to start, and with that, before we jump in, I think I want to just mention that after this, I will be sending out a list of all the questions and the answers, the written list. So if you have to drop off, we will be sending that out. We'll be posting a copy of this webinar, the recording online, and I'll also let you know how you can sign up for our daily email alerts. And again, we are using that 24,000 as a rule of thumb right now. We'll be evaluating as the summer goes on. If it's incredibly hot, we'll probably be revising that up. We'll let you know, or vice versa. And also, we recognize that you may want to have a place to talk about some of this stuff that might not be email, because you don't want to get blasted with so many emails. So we were thinking we could look at potentially the Massachusetts Municipal Energy Group, which some of you may have participated on. Their forums are a good place to do this. So we'll also let you know if we might start an official forum there. So we'll talk to the organizers about that. So I think with that, we will dive into some questions. And the first question is probably one that a lot of people had on their minds is, if my municipality is facing this issue, how about me at home? So the simple answer to that is that most of you are probably on basic service. Again, this is an issue on the supply side of your bill. So your bills are part distribution charges and then the supply charge. And so if you're on basic service, you don't really have any control over this. It just gets worked in, and everybody on basic service pays the same price. If you are on a competitive supply contract, then you should check with your individual broker. And if you are doing municipal aggregation, I think almost all of those programs are fixed rate, so it is not an issue there. So going on to also before we jump on, I want to say, as Ruthy mentioned, this came about because some people were really interested in this, including Martha Grover, I'll toss a shout out to, who let us know that they would like something done about this. MAPC wants to do more of this work to be a resource and help build capacity in the region. So let us know if there are other things like this that we can help out with. This is really fun for us. So another question is coming from the let's see here. We have, could you explain the difference between demand charges, which are on the distribution side of your bill, and the capacity charge on the supply side of the bill? So we didn't really talk about demand charges today, given the time we had. But Pat, perhaps that might be a question best suited for you.
Sure, and as Ruthy knows, I could easily turn this into a 25-minute overview. So I'm going to try and make this just a really quick directional answer. So capacity charges are paid directly into the ISO, which manages the New England the whole region, and that's for things like generation and the large-scale infrastructure. Demand charges you pay to your utility, and let me back up. Capacity is paid through your supply bill. Demand charges are paid directly to your utility, and those go to the utilities, basically their distribution network to keep that maintained and that infrastructure in place. The difference between how they're calculated is capacity. It's a one-time shot each year. Either hit it or you don't, and whatever you are at, during that 1 hour, that sets your capacity. That's what it is. Your demand charge in most tariffs, and this can vary sometimes, but in most tariffs, it actually resets itself every single month. So you have, depending on what your charge is, you have the potential opportunity to, on a monthly basis, to actually find some pretty good savings. And on some tariffs in this region, you might actually be on a tariff where your demand charges are extremely high. And what that is, that actually turns into sort of a double-edged sword. If your monthly demand kind of gets away from you a little bit, it's going to be very, very, very costly for you. On the flip side of it, if you are able to manage your demand in a more systematic way each month and get pretty good at it, you have a huge savings opportunity right there. And that's kind of like an operational area. Typically, that doesn't really require you to dip into your budgets to go and replace all sorts of capital equipment. It's just a matter of fine-tuning your operations in most cases. So hopefully that's helpful. I didn't want to dig in too deep into the weeds, but happy to talk afterward on that.
Thank you, Pat. Another question we got, someone is wondering, how many load shed days have Susan and Ruthy called in the past? Are we talking, are we looking at every day this summer, guys?
Susan?
We may have lost Susan. Well,
okay,
just so happens.
Sorry, here I am.
Oh, good.
We've had anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 or 6, depending on if the peak comes later in the season, because you're always comparing to what's come before. So last summer there were only 2, as everybody saw. There were a couple big spikes on that graph, but I think back in 2011 there were 4 or 5.
Right. So last year it was July 2nd. Let's say the number was 27,000. For the rest of the summer, you only have to shed load when you think you're going to go over 27,000. So the number of days that you are going to shed load all depends on how fast the heat comes in the summer. If you get that big, 4-day heat wave of 100 degrees in early July, you'll only have 1 or 2. If you have 3 or 4 or 5 heat waves all the way through the summer, then each time it might be the peak. So it really depends.
Excellent. Thanks. So yeah, it's not too many though, I think is a good for the bottom line.
It's not on weekends, so you don't have to manage it during the weekend. It's really, because the big usage are the big cities, everybody cranking their air conditioning, particularly in the afternoon when the sun is really beating down. That's usually when the peak's gonna be hit.
That's a great point. I think I don't know if we mentioned this, but the time, we talked about the dates that it has typically been. The times have typically been somewhere between 2 and 5 p.m. in the afternoon, so that way a morning email does give you lots of time to get the word out and plan for it even in that day, which is good. And in the spreadsheet I'm going to send out, in addition to tracking this year's information on a day-by-day basis, also has a tab for the historical information, so you can take a look at it and get a sense of those historical information.
Right. So Pat, want to jump in, Patrick? One option people have talked about is kind of really cranking the AC from 11 to 1, right, and then getting down to like 68 degrees, and then turning it up to 74 over the afternoon, to have hopefully the cool from the morning kind of seep in through the afternoon. This is a challenge for your own monthly demand, which Pat just explained. That's a different issue. But from a peak demand day, one way of managing a building that you really don't want it to get too hot, you can try to cool it off in the morning, knowing that the peak demand hour will usually be in the afternoon. It's just one tool to consider.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I also have a question about how to determine your current peak usage for your current operating year, and what that hour was. And I think the answer is for the hour is the same for everybody across the system, since it's the peak hour of the whole system. And I'll send that data will be in the spreadsheet for last year, but so we'll make sure to send that out. But then in terms of your usage in a given facility that you're currently being charged for, what your peak was, your broker should be able to give you that information. And I also ask any of the panelists if you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah,
go ahead, Pat. Yep.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the currently most folks, the only data they actually have into their usage and demand is through their electric bills, which come 40 days after the energy was actually physically used. So in order to, right now at this given time, to see what's actually being used in the building you're sitting in, which is an important component over the long run, especially as you're being more strategic about these costs, that actually takes the real-time metering, and that's something that we can help with.
Right, but if you wanted to see your peak use, let's say last year it was July 2nd at 4 o'clock, from 4 to 5, you can ask your consultant, your broker, and if you really wanted to dig into it, you could call NGrid or Eversource yourself and get that detailed data of your usage for that peak time. So that is logged, because there was a charge last year also. It's just not as painful as it's going to be this year. So if the question was, how do I know what my peak usage in KW was for last year's peak day, that is available. Your consultant can easily help you get that number. So you could say, if I used 1,000 KW last year at the peak time, what would my financial hit be this year, knowing that it's 3.43 is the kind of charge? That can be worked out. In fact, your consultant can give you the next 3 years for all of your metered buildings, what the approximate dollar figure is going to be based on what you've used in the previous years.
Excellent. And Pat, this is probably a question for you. If we already have EnerNOC metering devices in our schools from a previous load shedding program, can those devices be utilized to monitor usage and establish peak use in those school buildings?
Yes, those are actually the same meters that our software is run off. So, Matt, I'll shoot you an email and talk about the possibility of getting you that visibility there.
Awesome. Let's see. Someone also just asked about can we see some of this data live? Just a reminder that, as Susan showed, the ISO New England homepage will be graphing the actuals compared to the estimate live. And if you're really a nerd, you can download the ISO To Go app, which can entertain you for hours looking at where our energy sources are coming from at any given moment and the usage. I think another question that we want to address is this a building-specific issue, or is it sort of town-wide? And I think the key is that your capacity charge is really set per building, so that you do want to, I guess, reducing across all of your municipal buildings is good, but you're going to see the benefit on the specific bill for the building or buildings that you reduced at. And I think on that note, we have a question. If I have 20 or 30 meters, is my capacity charge the sum of all of those meters? And I'll let maybe Pat jump in on this, but I think the answer is no. Your capacity charge, it's a standalone charge per account.
I would say yes for the accounts that actually have the capacity charge. So if you have 30 meters, say, I don't know, maybe 15 of them are very, very small accounts, and on those tariffs that don't actually have this included, probably don't have to worry about those as much. But on the largest ones, I mean, no matter, it's going to be broken out by account number, so it's always assigned to what that specific account is doing. But if you want to look at it on an aggregate level across your town, I mean, that's for practical purpose, you could do that too.
All right, great. And yeah, just to recap, we talked about some of these big users. Of course, again, your brokers can help you figure out which accounts are, but town halls, schools, maybe senior citizen centers, possibly libraries. Anything else you would throw in there, Pat, Susan, or Ruthy?
I mean, in our town, it's only like 2 of the 7 elementary schools and the high school and the middle school, so not all schools. Some of this is just whatever meter your building got at that time. There are some schools have a bigger usage, but they don't have that integral meter, so they don't have this charge.
Okay, great.
A little bit random.
Yeah, I would say you really got to look it up, because I was surprised to find out which buildings were on time-of-use meters. It's not always predictable. For example, a middle school might not be, and a smaller elementary school might be on a time-of-use meter, so you really have to check it out.
Right, and it's right on the front page of your Eversource. It's right on the front page. They'll say B7, B3, A2. It's right there on the front page, so you can easily see that without having to call Eversource or ask your consultant. That's easy information to understand.
Great. Someone also asked, should we be expecting high capacity charges during the winter due to natural gas constraints as well? Pat, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, actually I saw that. That was one of the first questions that came in. I just did a quick pull of some data from the ISO website going all the way back to 1980. And since there's actually never been a non-summer peak capacity day registered. So historically, it's always happened in the summer. That does not mean that it cannot happen in the winter, but I would say it's probably unlikely given the fact that during the polar vortex, which was obviously the worst winter that we've had here from a grid standpoint, that peaked out at around, I think it was about 22,000 megawatts, whereas during last year's peak it was in the 26,000 to 27,000 range. So you probably don't have too much to worry about during the winter, although it is possible theoretically. It just hasn't ever happened. All
right, great. Another question is Pat, this is probably to you, Pat. What is the average cost of installing a pulse meter or other interval meter in a building in order to get real-time usage data? You can tackle that one.
Sure. Well, it depends. I mean, so through us, there's a couple different ways that you can do it, and so there's different packages that range from $1,000 a month down to $250 per month, depending on what you need and what you're looking to get out of it. So, Martha, I can also shoot you a quick email and kind of go over some of the specifics with you on that.
And Pat, I assume that you can also help, when folks are looking at this, you can help them look at what their potential savings might be and how that might compare in terms of a payback scenario from installing this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it has typically of all the investments you guys are likely considering, it's typically right up there among some of the better returns that you can find as far as investment goes.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think that's about it for our questions. I guess Ruthy and Susan, any other like sort of secret sauce tips, in terms of for actually doing the load shed? Clearly AC is a big user here. Anything else that or quick tips to share before we head out?
Yeah, I mean, I would say talk to the person who runs the programs in that building. There's lots of smaller things, like Susan was saying. Move programs to the back of the building where there aren't as many windows. You might even invest in blinds if you have a big window wall. Little things that can make a difference that won't be so disruptive and can do something you could do quickly while you're thinking about the bigger issues. So it doesn't only have to be increasing the air conditioning temperature to 76 degrees. It could be sort of other things that will make an impact while you figure out how you're going to manage the bigger charges if they're coming.
And I think also it sounds like, you may have some ideas about what works, but talk to the people who are operating that building on a daily basis, because they may have some ideas that you wouldn't have thought of.
Right, and I think, Patrick, one thing you said that people should know, even if you're on a fixed contract now, at some point you won't be. You'll have to renew. And again, they will consider the risk of your account based on how much capacity charge they're going to have to absorb. Even though you're on a fixed contract now, it's not like you can just turn the AC down to 68 and not worry about it, because that does affect how you're seen later on as a risk. So it might not be a financial hit now, but it could be a increased sense of risk for that account in the future.
Awesome. We've got a couple last questions just on what accounts, and so Ruthy, I think you hit it nail on the head that in general, for Eversource, it's B7 and National Grid G3, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But again, because of when your utility installed the meter and who knows what, check your bill, talk to your consultant. And also, someone just noted for us that they did some math, and there's a significant savings for installing Tesla power packs at the school. That's awesome, and you would be super cool and cutting edge. I believe, though, there's already a wait list for Tesla power packs, so you may be a little late. But if anyone does that, please let us know. We'd be super excited about that. And also, just please give us feedback, too. Feedback on the emails we're sending out, feedback on what you do, and if you have questions, maybe we can do another webinar or just a time for people to get together and chat and talk about this. So, I think that we'll pretty much wrap it up. But we'll stay on the line here if folks have any other questions. And I guess final question: if it's not a time of use account, is the capacity charge just not called out? Is it still buried?
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
You just don't have control over it.
Right. It's not as big, but it's a lot harder to make a dent in that. But there is a capacity charge. It's just not as big as the metered accounts.
Right. Yeah. If your meter isn't sending the information to the supplier about how much you used at that hour, then they have to make assumptions based on what the whole entire system was doing. So that's the scoop. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, so much. Really appreciate this, and looking forward to hearing how things go. Get out there and shed some load.